Hi everybody. This class will be talking about the self and personal identity. So what constitutes identity over time is going to be the main question that we deal with this lecture, and really understanding how something remains the same thing over time. What is it that makes something the same from one point in time to another point in time? And so when dealing with identity, it's important to really understand what identity means. And identity is essentially that relationship of a thing that a thing bears to itself. So what something is at time t and what that thing is at time t2 has to have something that persists in both situations and both times to really consist of being that same thing, or something that makes that thing the same. And so the question we want to ask is, what makes something the same as something else over time? Now, there are a lot of implications for this, as well as thought experiments that we're going to go over. Some common implications are that if I'm not the same person as I was 10 years ago, am I bound or liable to keep promises that the person from 10 years ago made? If I'm married and I change my personality over time, if I lose a limb over time, am I still the same person and bound to the same standards and promises, responsibilities that I had made and entered into prior to those changes? Now, of course, we're going to want to ultimately assume that, yes, if you make marriage vows when you're 25 and then 30 years later, you think about those same vows, while I'm different in many ways, it should be the case, or it is the case, we would want to say that those vows should be agreed to and accepted as being part of my current promise. But this creates a problem, because what is it that makes me the same person from the age of 25 to the age of 55? What is it that makes an object the same over a given amount of time? There's going to be different solutions to this problem, and just like always, we will see that there are problems with each of these solutions. But it's important for us to know really where our sense of personal identity comes from, and where it is that our identity is created or goes, or can we lose it? If I'm incarcerated at the age of 18 for a crime and change the person who I am, and at the age of 35 am no longer that same person, is it the case that perhaps I should be let go? Should I be released from jail? A story comes to mind. If anyone's seen the movie The Shawshank Redemption, the character Red, played by Morgan Freeman, is a character who makes a mistake and is sentenced to a life sentence for murder in his teens. And then at an older age, in his 50s or 60s, is a completely different person. And so would we suggest that it's that same person that committed the same crime, or a different person that should be treated differently? And it all goes back into our behavior and how we should conduct ourselves when dealing with people, when dealing with promises and behaviors. And as an example of this identity problem, philosophers often think of the Ship of Theseus. Now, the Ship of Theseus is a story in which an ancient ship is sent off to fight in a war. So to paint the picture, you have this old Greek wooden ship with 50 men aboard. And these 50 men are going to sail across the sea to fight the Persians. And so, as the ship ends its first battle, there are certain damages that the ship takes on that need to be fixed before it gets into its next battle. So perhaps in the first battle, certain planks are broken, there are certain men that have died, certain pieces of the ship need to be replaced because of wear and tear by the sea. So the ship goes to battle for a second time and loses a few more men, and a few more pieces of the ship need to be replaced. On its entry into its third battle, the ship has replenished its men, and the men have fixed all of the problems and pieces with the ship that have been broken. So it fights in its third battle, and again, more men die, and more pieces of the ship broken. After a lifetime of this ship being in service, it sails back to its original port. And by the time it gets to the port, there are no pieces of the ship that are of the original Ship of Theseus. Every single piece and every single man over time has been replaced on the ship, and yet it's the Ship of Theseus that returns to port. But let's say that when the ship went into its battle for the first time, and the pieces were broken and had to be replaced. Imagine there was a historian that is following the ship and picks up all of the broken pieces. And when the ship has to replace certain planks of wood or its mast, the historian collects those pieces and collects more and more pieces as the ship needs to be replaced. So now the Ship of Theseus returns to port. However, the gentleman who had been following the ship rebuilds the Ship of Theseus out of all of its original parts and puts it in a museum. Now the question becomes, which ship is the Ship of Theseus? It can't be the case that both ships are the Ship of Theseus. It has to be the case that one of them is the Ship of Theseus and the other is not. Is the ship that returns back to port? Or is the ship that's sitting in a museum completely reassembled out of its original parts? We see instances like this happen all the time. If you've ever seen one of those car remodel shows on TV where someone brings in their old beater piece of junk car and the crew fixes up the car, gives it new paint, puts in new windows, changes the electronics on the dashboard. Is the car that's given back to the owner the actual car? In most of these shows, you see that the owner of the car has an emotional connection to the car. The car was the same car that my father and I worked on before he died, so this car means a lot to me. But I never got around to finishing it or rebuilding it, and now it's just sitting in my garage. And so I bring it to the shop, and the shop is able to rebuild this car. Is the car that they give back to me that same car that me and my dad worked on? Should the car that they give back to me have the same emotional connection that the car that I gave them had to me. In many instances, it's not just cases of these repair crews fixing small pieces of the car. We're going to change out the tires. We're going to put some new electronics in the car, make it more up to date. In a lot of these instances, the car is stripped down to its frame, and sometimes even the frame gets rebuilt. And so what does it mean for something to be the same thing over a given time? This example, and the Ship of Theseus example, really brings to light a couple of questions that we need to consider when we talk about identity. What makes the Ship of Theseus that leaves the same ship that comes back? Is the ship that comes back even the same? All its parts are different. All of the men are different. So how is this the same ship? And if the original pieces were to be collected and reassembled, would the Ship of Theseus be that reassembled ship? Or would the Ship of Theseus be the ship that returns back from port? So again, to really understand this question, we need to dig a little bit deeper into finding out what qualities make identity. What do we mean when we use the term identity? When we talk about identity, we need to understand the qualities that make something the same over time. And there are two ways to break this down: two essential qualities and accidental qualities. Essential qualities are those qualities of an object that make the object what they are. For instance, water equals H2O. Water is H2O. H2O is water. So we talked about this with the philosophy of mind and identity theory. What gives something an analytic identity? And here we see that H2O and water are two of the same thing. Without H2O, you don't have water. Without water, you don't have H2O. These are both necessary and sufficient for the identity of the other. Essential qualities are the things that make up what a thing is. It's what needs to be there in order for something to be the same, or the thing that it is. Accidental qualities, on the other hand, are those qualities that don't necessarily need to be had in order for something to be the thing that it is. Take, for instance, a dog, and a quality of the dog is that this animal has a tail. Now, is it the case that if the tail is gone, then the dog is no longer a dog? Not necessarily. There are plenty of dogs that have had their tail docked. There are plenty of dogs that have been bred not to have a tail. Maybe the dog had a disease, or something happened to the dog where the tail had to be removed. Does the dog lose its dogness when there's a loss of the tail? What about with the human? A human has certain qualities about him or herself. I have 2 arms, 2 legs, a nose, 2 ears, 2 eyes, and a mouth. Do any of these qualities define my identity? Are any of these qualities essential for me to be who I am? Is it the case that if I fight in a war and come back home and have lost my legs, that I am no longer Alex Scavone? If I lose an arm or an eye, if I lose the ability to walk or to play sports or to teach, do I become less of Alex Scavone? Or are these just accidental qualities that I have? Now, it's the case that these seem to be accidental. These qualities don't make me who I am. But when it comes to identity, what we want to look for are the essential qualities. What makes something that thing? To where if the thing loses those qualities, it no longer is that thing. This is our question. This is what we need to find out. And so there are three arguments that we're going to look at, three preliminary positions of what makes something the same over time. We have the soul criterion, in which you have this soul that persists through time. So even though I have a changing body, there is this soul that remains constant. There is the physical criterion, which means I am physically myself, right? I have my fingers, my toes, right? This is when we look at those qualities. Does the dog's tail make the dog a dog? Is it all of my physical qualities combined? And then the last preliminary theory that we're going to look at is the memory criterion. Am I who I am based on my memory of the things that I've done in the past? I remember playing on the schoolyard when I was 15. Or I remember playing hacky sack when I was 10. And so it must be me that used to play hacky sack. So if you watch the video for today, or if you watch the video accompanied with this lecture, you'll see the example in the thought experiment of Lumpel and Goliath. A lump of clay that's shaped into the statue of Goliath. Now, is it the case that Goliath is Lumpel? Lumpel being the name of the block of clay. Is Lumpel Goliath? Does the shape change what the thing is? Does my consideration about what the thing is change what it is? How can we understand these two objects made from the same material? In the instance that Lumpel is shaped into Goliath, it wouldn't seem as though the lump of clay is any less a lump of clay, it's just shaped into Goliath. But if Goliath were to automatically change back into Lumpel, would Goliath no longer be there? Or is Goliath always there, under the Lumpel of clay? There are also instances of mind transfer, thought experiments, of splicing that we're going to focus on in the next lecture. And in each instance, we have to ask, where is the identity? What makes something the same as something else? And so when we think of the soul criterion, which is the first argument for identity, we're going to want to say that a person's the same over time because every person has an unchanging soul that persists through time. The soul in this case is that essential quality. When you lose the soul, the person no longer exists. If the person no longer exists, there must be no soul. So here, the soul is not some accidental quality that could be lost or could be gained. The soul is something permanent, it's something necessary, it's what makes a person a person. This is a very intriguing position because, as we'll see with memory and the physical criterion, there's going to be a problem with change over time. The soul, however, because of its non-physical characteristic, we can imagine a soul that doesn't change. Your soul is as it always was. But then we have to ask, really, what is the soul? When a person changes, grows up, has a different personality, is the soul really the same thing? Is the soul attached or aligned with the personality? Religion would have us believe that the soul is something that persists even when the body dies, because the soul is unchanging. But again, this creates problems with this belief in identity. First of all, you would have to understand exactly what this soul is and where it came from and how it works. So think back to the problems with Descartes and dualism. All of those problems would seem to be problems for the soul criterion. And you would have to answer why or how does the soul not change? What is the soul? If the soul is the embodiment of the person or the essence of the person, does that change? So is my soul the same when I'm 1 year old versus when I'm 45 years old? Is my soul the same? Never changes? Never adapts? This might seem problematic. If we take a Christian perspective of the matter, of the soul, and think, well, if I'm born with this essence and this soul given to me by God, is it the case that my soul is already determined to be good or bad, to go to heaven or hell? Or am I able to change my path? This really brings to light questions that we're going to deal with in following lectures when it comes to free will. But we have to ask, really, is the soul something that doesn't change? Because if it does change, then we need to understand how the soul remains the same over time, even though it's changing. So what is it about the soul? What characteristics or qualities about the soul give it the same identity over time? Because if it's the case that the soul changes, then we're back at step one with the Ship of Theseus. The next argument is the physical criterion. And now the physical criterion basically says that a thing is the same if it's comprised of the same stuff. So here we're back talking about a physical world, a physicalist perspective on identity. So a thing that has the same stuff will be considered the same thing over time. So if we're to look back at the example of the Ship of Theseus, we would come to the conclusion that the ship that's rebuilt in the museum is the Ship of Theseus. Because it's the ship in the museum that's comprised of the same stuff that originally set sail. For a person, I'm the same person that I am because of my physical stuff. Because I have my 2 arms, my 2 legs, my nose. And those things persist with me. But herein lies the problem. Once again, what if I were to lose my arms? Would I not be the same person anymore? If a criminal gets sentenced to life in prison and then cuts off one of his fingers, there's no longer a physical criterion that matches to the original person that was incarcerated. And so, if that is a different person, we would have to then say that that person should be released from prison because they do not resemble or have the same identity of the person that originally came in. And there are also other issues with this. Look at the Ship of Theseus, for example. While the Ship of Theseus set sail, and after its first battle only lost a few pieces and only had to have a few boards replaced, does it lose its identity when a few boards are replaced? When 20% of the boards are replaced? Or is it not until 51% of the ship becomes replaced that it loses its identity? So the Ship of Theseus is the Ship of Theseus until, let's say, the 7th battle, when it loses 51% of its original pieces. By this logic, no cars on any of these car shows would ever be the same. Because whenever you watch these car shows, they replace 95% of the car. But what is it about the 50%? Why is it when most things are replaced that it becomes something different? Think back to the example of myself. It might be the case that I embody myself throughout time because I have 2 arms, 2 legs, nose, ears, etc. But it's also the case scientifically that around every 7 years, all of the cells in my body die and are replaced with new cells. So after 7 years, right, my skin is comprised of cells that are different from 7 years ago. My hair is different than 7 years ago. Every part of my body is replenished every 7 years in terms of my cells. Not to mention, when you look at the particular atoms and molecules on a quantum level, we see that they change. Molecules will lose electrons or gain electrons, will combine with other molecules or separate out from different molecules. So there's always change going on, even in the body. And so the physical criterion is going to force us into a position to really suggest that it's a new person that exists every few years or every 7 years. So is it the case that if I make my wedding vows and then 7 years later I cheat on my spouse, it's somehow okay because I am not that person that made the promise? I don't think any of us would really buy that. If our significant other came up to us and said, "Oh, well, it's okay, I was a different person then," well, that really wouldn't matter. We would continue to believe that you are the same person. While your personality might be different, while your physical cells have regenerated, we would want to say that there's something about you that's the same. I am going to hold you responsible, same as I did before. Because you have that identity. You are that person. There's something of you that persists. But again, what is that thing? The physical criterion seems to be very problematic in this regard and doesn't really explain or take into account how things change over time, especially on that quantum level. And if things are changing, then what is it that makes it the same? So we're back to square one with the Ship of Theseus. Of if the pieces get replaced, is it the same thing over time? This, of course, is a big problem with understanding how a person or how an identity can persist throughout time. The last criterion that we're going to look at is the memory criterion. And the memory criterion was famously expressed by John Locke, who we've looked at before in this class. And he believed that what made someone identical to the person that they are over time was that there was a memory had by the person who came after of the person who came before. And so here, what constitutes identity is the fact that I can remember my past self. And so what makes me identical to my past self is that I can remember that. So for instance, when I was young, when I was 12 years old or so, I broke my arm playing hockey. The coach blew the whistle, and we were all supposed to stop so that our placement, so that the position that we were in could be critiqued. And there was a kid on my team who could not skate backwards to save his life. And so when the coach blew the whistle and everyone was supposed to freeze, he could not stop and was coming directly at me. I put my arms up to block myself. And when he ran into me, my wrist bent back so far that it snapped my right radius, the right bone in my forearm. Now I can remember vividly that day, it happening, the pain, having to skate off the ice, my mom come up to me, being in tears, asking her to drive me to the hospital, have the doctor cut off my skates, and put my arm in a cast. I can remember a lot of details to that day. But is it my ability to remember what happened what makes me that 12-year-old boy that broke his arm? Or is it something else? Am I going to keep my vows to my spouse because I can remember making my vows? Once again, this theory is not without its problems. And so there are two main problems with the memory criteria. The problem of faulty memory and the problem of false memory. Take, for instance, amnesia cases. If my identity is based on my memory, if I forget some aspect of my life, am I then not the person that was a part of those events? So for instance, when I become older and more senile, and I, for some reason, forget that I broke my arm when I was 12, someone were to ask me, have you broken a bone? And I think, no, not that I can recall. is it then the case that I am not the same person as that 12-year-old boy who broke his arm? Or am I still the same person, I just can't remember breaking my arm? What about all the things that we've forgotten over the years? I've forgotten that I ate lunch 3 days ago. I forgot what I had for lunch 3 days ago. Is it the case that I didn't have whatever it is that I had for lunch 3 days ago? It would seem that just because I can't have a memory of something doesn't make me the same person. Doesn't not make me the same person. What about when I fall asleep? When I'm asleep, am I the same person that went to bed? Because when I'm asleep, I certainly don't remember going to bed. And if I don't remember going to bed, then I can't be the same person that's asleep. Because what identity is over time and me to persist through time means that I need to be able to remember going to sleep. But I don't, so I must not be a person. So does that mean you can break into my house and steal my belongings? Because technically those belongings have no owner? Because I'm not the person that bought them because I'm asleep and I can't remember them? Of course not. That certainly would be an interesting defense in a court of law, though. Would be a bit stupid, but funny nonetheless. Well, what about the problem of faulty memory? There are plenty of things that have happened in all of our pasts that have been explained to us through stories. We've seen pictures. And we begin to create a past based on the story we've heard. So for instance, my parents always tell me these stories about when I was a baby, when I was a child. And I think to myself, oh yeah, that rings a bell. I can remember that. Maybe I saw a picture of something. I saw a picture of myself at Disneyland. And my parents told me the story, oh, when you were young, you went to Disneyland. Remember, you kind of jumped into that little fountain and made a mess, and we had to take you home, and you were soaking wet. And I think, oh, yeah, I do remember that. I saw the picture of myself at Disneyland. I start piecing together these memories that I have about jumping in the fountain and being wet all day. But then what if it turns out that my parents are mistaken, and it was actually my brother that jumped in the fountain? He was the one that was wet and had to be taken home. Is it the case that because I feel like I remember that, that's now a part of my memory, that person is me, I am my brother? Or is it the case that, well, obviously that person wasn't you, it was your brother, and you just think you remember that situation happening? And psychologically, this has been shown that people, when led to believe some memory, some event happening in their past, they're inclined to build a story around it as if that were part of their life. But if it's not part of their life, then when we say that that person's the person that did it, according to John Locke, he would say, well, no, it's based on the memory. If you have a memory of doing it, that must be you. And so we see this problem with faulty memory or not remembering things, and the persistence over time of doing this really creates a sense of a changing person. And once again, when you change, when a person changes, when their memories change, what is that essential characteristic? What is that essential quality that makes the person who he or she is? One solution to this problem, particularly with the physical and memory criterion, is the idea of continuity over time. And the continuity over time suggests that I am the same person that I am because my physical criteria has continuity to it. Think back to the Ship of Theseus. After the first battle, pieces of the original ship have to be replaced for more complete, better pieces in order to make it whole. Once the ship is rebuilt, because the new pieces of the ship continue on with the old pieces of the ship, the new pieces then gain the quality of being the Ship of Theseus. So then as boards start becoming replaced, as long as there's some continuity between each set of boards, you start to see the ship persisting over time. Now take this along with our psychological state or our memory. If my memory, right, if I can remember something from a second ago, then I'm the same person that I was a second ago. If that person a second ago remembers the person from a second ago, that person is the same from a second ago. And if that person remembers something from a second ago, then that person is the same person as the person a second ago. And this goes all the way back until the very beginning of your psychology, the very beginning of your memory or your ability to think and conceptualize. We can use the thought experiment here of the brave officer and just transitivity as it relates to logic, the implication of transitivity. Let's say the brave officer is this gentleman that participates in a heroic act at the age of 18. And then, because of the direction of his bravery, of his ability to work hard and be good at doing his job, he moves up several positions and is promoted to a captain. This captain works on a police force for 20 years and then retires. And in the age of 80, this retired police captain can't remember the heroic act that he did when he was 18, but he remembers being promoted to captain. And the captain does remember the heroic act when he was 18. And so here, when we think of this law of transitivity, A equaling B, the 18-year-old that's remembered by the 30-year-old captain, or the 40-year-old captain, who is then remembered by the 80-year-old retired captain, makes the case that the 80-year-old retired captain and the brave officer have to be the same person. So here, A equals B and B equals C. Therefore, it must be the case that A equals C. And so this is going to be something that we talk about in the next lecture. This is going to be a solution to both the physical and psychological criterion that will help us to understand, perhaps better, this idea of identity. And there will be slight twists to these theories. As we'll see next time, it's not necessarily just memory that has continuity, but the whole psychological process, the whole psychology of a person is continuous with the psychology of a person over time. And so, as we read Derek Parfit, we'll see that he's going to make the case for a psychological continuity in order for a person to be the same person over time. And that will be next lecture. So, if you have any questions, as always, please don't be afraid to email me, mention it in the discussion. And as always, I will be setting up a time later in the week to have my Skype on in case you want to ask me or talk about anything via video chat. Other than that, have a good rest of your day, and I will be speaking with you for the next lecture.